Welcome to the Math Academy podcast. I'm Justin Skyzak, Chief Quant and Director of Analytics at Math Academy, and I'm here with our founder, Jason Roberts, to talk about one of the biggest dangers in both learning and startups, falling off the rails. This unfortunately happens all the time in college math classes, where each weekly problem set might have just a handful of really long problems, each taking like an hour or more. The hope is that students will somehow self-scaffold across the large gaps in knowledge. But the reality is that many of these students can't build those bridges on their own. So they just fall off the rails. And the same failure mode even shows up in startups. Founders of growing companies can't be hands off. The real danger isn't micromanaging, it's letting things fall off the rails. Early stage companies need founders in founder mode, in the weeds, actively keeping everybody aligned, not manager mode, which you might see at big, stable organizations. But here's the interesting part. Yeah, keeping things on the rails requires relentless communication, but it's also important to often let that communication flow out of scope. Every innovation, every solved problem requires relevant background context, and you often don't know what the full context is beforehand. Staying on the rails requires context sharing, and overscoping limits context sharing. So, how do you force things to stay on the rails, yet allow conversations to flow out of scope? Let's get into it. Why don't we talk about the inspiration for various features on the system?
Okay.
Like, why are lessons the way they are? Why
Mm.
are the problems why don't we do like a math problem set, like 20-minute problems, where you why are our problems like generally like a minute, 2 minutes, or in the really really advanced courses maybe sometimes you have a 3-minute problem. It's not very common, but generally it's like why do we scope them down so much? um
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good
that kind
one.
of
That's
stuff.
a
Why do we measure answer time on the diagnostic? Why not just let people spend as much time as they want on the problem? There's things like that that
yeah.
I'm sure some listeners are familiar, who have like read the Math Academy way, and are just like really following our stuff a lot. But these are kind of common questions that I think we have kind of interesting answers to, and not just interesting answers like why, but also like failure modes. Like I can tell you like 5 different ways that the learning experience can fail if you don't do a lesson the way that we do it.
I mean, there's more than one way for something to succeed, but there's an infinite number of ways for them to fail, right? So it's sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like there's not one way, but there's a limited number of ways to get a really good outcome. There are a lot of ways to get a good to great outcome, right? And it just starts expanding to get a pretty good or acceptably good. Okay, there's a lot of ways you can do it. Okay, it's an okay. They learned some stuff. It's pretty good. There's a lot of ways to do that. But then we're just failure, like infinite failures. There's just so many ways to make things just go wrong, and um, a lot of instincts that people have are just kind of backwards. They just don't work. There's a lot of sort of delusions or fantasies about what they think should or shouldn't happen, and it isn't until if you were held accountable that you go, oh, I guess it doesn't work so well or isn't so efficient or whatever. But let's talk about problem time. I think that's an interesting one that you brought that up. Like, what's the optimal length that a problem should be? Now, I think you'd have to think, okay, per level of math. So the optimal problem length for a fourth grader is not going to be the same thing for optimal problem length for a student in multivariable calculus. That a 20-year-old might be doing if they were going as part of their standard education. First of all, there's the difficulty of the math. So if I'm adding 7 plus 4 or something, like, it just doesn't take that long. But these are basic fundamental building block skills that are in themselves simple. And so you just want to get a lot of reps on those things. But of course, these the attention span of a kid that age, right? And as they get older, they can have a little bit of time. What you would expect out of a seventh or eighth grader would be more than a fourth grader, but not out of like a 10th grader, and so on. So the older you get, the more ability you have to sort of have more self-control, I think. And there's a sort of academic term for it. It's escaping me at the moment, but you
Thinking
so
of
you
like
have that to
executive
contend with,
functioning.
right? What were you gonna say?
Oh, were you thinking of executive functioning?
Yeah, well,
Kind
executive
of
function. Yeah, executive function would be one. It wasn't the exact term, but you're right. You know what their executive function is. Which kind of determines
attention
like
span. Yeah.
what should I be doing?
Hmm.
Like, it's as far as the task selection or what part of the task should I be doing. It's sort of the organizing or planner, of your brain. So an executive function is not a part of your brain, but part of the cognitive process.
Hmm.
So the thing is, like, okay, if you think about it like this, okay, so if I'm running, I don't know, let's call it soccer practice, I'm coaching soccer, and I say, well, there's a lot of things these kids got to learn. They got to learn how to, depending what age group there are, right? Well, let's just say I'm dealing with some, 12-year-olds or something. It's like, well, a lot of them don't know really how to tackle that well. A lot of them don't know how to, a lot of them can't strike the ball very well. Some don't need to work on their dribbling. We need to be able to work on how to mark up defense. We need to work how to cross the ball. But there's all these things we got to work on, right? And I can think of 10 really, really important things that just will move the needle, like now. And then I got another 20 or 30 that are also important, but I need to get to. Okay. So you're like, okay, well, how about I spend all practice on one of those skills? You'd probably go that. So they're going to be really good at tackling, but they can't dribble and they can't shoot the ball and they can't do anything else. You're like, yeah, but they can tackle like nobody's business. That doesn't, not only is that not going to be an optimal outcome if you're like competing against other teams, because we have, like, you're held accountable on Saturday's soccer game, right? If you get lose 10-0 and the kids are crying, the parents are like, what are you doing, coach? These other kids seem like they can dribble and stuff. Our kids can't do anything. You're like, oh, well, really just want to spend all the time tackling. That doesn't make any sense, right? So you want to apportion it out over all of the fundamental skills that are really important to this overall effort. And so you think, okay, well, if I'm going to have them work, I can only work on, I don't know, at an individual practice, I can probably work on 5 of them because practice isn't 3 hours long. I get like an hour and a half at best. And kids don't listen. I got to get them organized. There's some friction in there to just getting everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so you think, okay, well, okay, so in each individual skill, like how much they need multiple reps, how can I get enough reps on each one so that it sticks? Because if I say, okay, you do 1 rep, you get to strike the ball 1 time, and then we're doing something else. The kid, like, that's not enough. Do you have to strike it 200 times? No, that's excessive. Like, what is it? I don't know. Depending on it, 10, 20, 30 times. If it's something that I can do, it takes 10 seconds to do. You're two players, or you separate them by 30 yards and you're striking it back and forth, and maybe you can get, a strike every, 30 seconds. You kick it back and forth, guy traps it, steps it on, okay, step around, strike it again. Okay, sometimes you miss and you have to go get it. Okay, so 5 minutes, you get, let's call it 10 strikes. You're like, okay, I'd like 30 strikes, but I got to work on throw-ins. I got to work on it. So you're like, so you're thinking, so you're trying to set up the drill so that it's as efficient as possible. Because if I only had 2 guys kicking it and the rest of the players on the line watching them, then everybody gets like 1 or 2 strikes and the drill like 20 minutes. I was like, what if I had you have a partner, everybody spaces out, everybody's 20 yards apart or 30 yards apart. You strike it back and forth. This looks a little chaotic, but everybody's getting lots of strikes. And I'm walking along, make sure everybody's, hey, no, get the ball set. Come on, you got to plant your foot. Okay, good. Hit it, strike, but follow through. Okay, look, aim it to the guy, right? So he doesn't go chase every time, right? Okay, so you kind of do the correction. So again, you're like, okay, everybody got 10, maybe 15 solid strikes. You're kind of like, okay, that's good. Now, if I'd done it the other way and they got they sat in a line and I got 1 strike, you'd be like, an more experienced coach would be like, Jason, I think you get more out of your practice time if you like organize structured things a little different. And I'd be like, oh yeah, that's a good point, right? So you think of that from math, you're like, okay, well, if I have a math problem that takes 10 minutes or 20 minutes, then how many reps can I get? And there are, in any particular problem, there are very specific component subtasks that subtasks that you really want them focused in on. There's other stuff in there that's like a lot of arithmetic and stuff. Well, this turns into, okay, well, after I do this integration or differentiation, I got all these fractions and I get all this fraction arithmetic and I got to, you know what I mean? It's like, I know you know fractions. Like, I don't want you spending 7 minutes on the arithmetic.
Yeah, we need to concentrate your practice on the stuff that is new, that you're struggling most with, that you don't know yet. Concentrate on that. Pull that out of the skill. I mean, we'll practice putting it back in, doing the whole skill altogether. And yes, you do need to keep doing stuff with fractions, but that'll happen naturally. Like we'll have some problems like that. We don't need to go crazy on it every single time. We need to really hammer down the new movement that we're trying to get you to learn.
Exactly. Now, I think one of the if I recall, like the course that was the most difficult to do that with was multivariable calculus, right?
Yeah,
Though,
right.
and linear algebra maybe too. Both those can blow up into the massive computations, right? And I remember Alex really worked because I remember like some team they would create these things, and then there would be a problem. It'd take like 7 minutes, and I remember early conversations with Alex, like we gotta try and get these things to 2 or 3 minutes. And then he was like, yeah, that's a good point. And then he really went back and was like, well, how can we frame these problems so they maybe the setup part, maybe it's the setting up of the integral or calculating some of the integrals important, where we're asking for is, I don't need you to complete the entire computation. That's going to take 5 minutes. I just need you to recognize the context, the situation, the parameters. I need to parameterize the integral. I need you to figure out what the function is that you were actually integrating. I need you to figure out some, whatever the bounds or the things, and then maybe do a couple of steps. And like you squeezed 90%, 95% out of the problem. And you did so in 90 seconds. But if I made you do the whole thing, top to bottom, it would take you 10 minutes.
Yeah, not only would it take you 10 minutes, but there's a larger likelihood that you're gonna fall off the rail somewhere in there, especially if this is your first encounter and this problem is going to take you a while, and now you're 5 minutes in, you've kind of drifted off, now you're kind of doing the wrong thing, you spend the next 5-10 minutes doing the wrong thing, and then you get the problem wrong. Now like 15 minutes have passed and you've just realized like, oh, that's what I got wrong, that I need to do this differently. It's better to just like, let's just start by focusing on the new thing that you're most likely to mess up.
Right.
Let's get you strong on that. You get like, maybe you get the first problem wrong because you have a subtle misinterpretation of what it is you're supposed to do, and then that draws your attention to like, oh, I get it, I should have done this, and then only 1 minute has passed. Now you fix that on the next minute. 2 minutes have passed. You get a few reps doing that correctly, and now we do that again on another part of the problem. And now after that, we kind of pull it all together
right. So you're making them do the ugly parts some of the time, but on different problems. Yeah. Right. Sometimes you have to do the finishing part. Sometimes you do the setup part. Sometimes, whatever. But we're gonna focus our fire on the part that really matters, the tricky, the new part, the part that the student doesn't get. I know you can differentiate this function or integrate it or do this, but I don't know if you understand how to set up an integral for the spherical, polar equation or something. And, we need reps, and I'm not going to show it. You're going to do one and you get it anymore. If you strike the ball one time, you're a great ball striker. Like, I'm sorry, there's a lot of reps on this thing. So, what's interesting is I think like a lot of universities, they would have to do the whole problem. So if you got a problem set, you would fill up pages of stuff doing your multivariable calculus problem sets, right? Your homework. Now, I remember you kind of placed out of a lot of that stuff because you did it on your own when you were in high school, and you were more proof oriented level stuff. But I remember your now wife, Sanjana, when she was at Caltech,
I saw a lot of the problem sets and stuff like that. It was enough, like where it was very clear. It's like, okay, you have a very small number of problems, and these problems are like really, really hard. And this is kind of like the standard. I mean, um, I did help Sanjana's sister with some of her math
Real analysis,
in
right?
college, real analysis, like
Which is known to be a
yeah,
very, very difficult class for even talented math majors at really, selective schools. This is always a hard class.
yeah, yeah. And so the types of problems that she was getting is like, well, this is typically how it goes, but you get like, I don't know, like 5, 10 problems on a weekly set or something,
Mhm.
and these problems are all like really advanced. Like you're not getting reps on just your standard definitions, like proving that something simple is a closed set. No, we're going to give you some really crazy situation, some really crazy, construct this crazy mathematical object, and you're supposed to infer that it's a closed set or an open set or whatever, and we're gonna and because of that, you're also supposed to infer that, well, like you can use these theorems for closed or open sets that are
Right.
going to take you into it. Like, I mean, yeah, you got to build up to that, of course, but like as kind of your first, as your first, like, no, like just strike the ball. We're not practicing like your buddy kicks it to you. You do like a twirl and like you're upside down and then you kick it into the top corner of the goal. Like you just got to kick the ball first. That's what we should do first. But that's often not what happens. And so of course it's like it's just kind of like, unless you what really needs to happen, what happens in that sort of situation, the students who succeed in that either have learned this in a better practice conditions elsewhere, or they have figured out how to kind of scaffold themselves through the reps that need to happen. Like they think like, okay, I know this has something to do with closed sets or open sets. I don't I forget exactly how the proofs work in that. Let me spin up on that, and then you like go on you take it upon yourself to go through a few examples of that, and then you return back to your problem. It's like they're trying to force you into doing some like self scaffolding, like
Mm-hmm.
for you to teach yourself up
Really
to this
tough.
level,
Really.
but they're not telling you how to do that. It's just everyone just assumes like, oh well, of course, like students should know how to scaffold themselves up to this level, and if they don't, then they're just lazy, which is not true. This often doesn't occur to students unless they work with somebody who kind of shows them like, okay, all right, here this is how you kind of approach the problem. These are the heuristics for kind of getting yourself from A to B. And like one of the things that I mean, probably the best example of something that was not uh, explicitly taught in the class, but is like the number one technique for all sorts of proofs, is that it's kind of like you often are trying to just you're trying to transform some input assumptions into an output result, and you've got these two ends of the rope. Now the closer you can move these two ends to each other, the easier your time you're going to have, just like you having the insight of how to bridge the gap.
That's right.
So what you want to do, like if you don't see how to approach it immediately, then it's like, well, why don't we just take the input assumptions and sort of like, are there any theorems that we can apply to them to sort of get in the direction of what we're of the output result? And then you do some work on that, and you're like, well, okay, we got a few things that we can do here, and then you start at the opposite end. You're like, okay, here's the output result. Let's work backwards from that. What if we got, what are some states that, like, if we got here, then we could then conclude the result. Let's just figure out what those could be, and then you kind of work backwards a bit, and then eventually you realize like, oh hey, if we this if you take the input in this direction and you take the output, bring it back in this direction, then those two quantities, those two expressions, whatever, they start to sort of look a little similar. to each other. You don't see it fully off the bat, but it kind of brings your focus into like, oh, okay. So really, I bet what we're going to have to do is turn this thing into that thing. Now your gap, now you just recurse, right? It's same problem over and over again, but now your two ends of the rope are closer, and you just keep doing this until you complete it. But anyway, so this was like one of those meta principles that was like with the types of proofs that she was doing, that you really have to be good at this. But it's something it was not scaffolded up, and it was not, this meta heuristic was not taught explicitly.
Yeah, so that's known as the forwards backwards method, right? So it's for anyone who's unfamiliar. Remember when I've taught methods of proof to my sixth graders. So this is normally a freshman math major class for students who've completed calculus, ideally before they take real analysis or abstract algebra. They used to not do this in my time, but over, I think in the 2000s and 2010s, that became more and more common. They're like, okay, we need this we need to sort of course on proof techniques, methods of proof, introduction to abstract mathematics. It goes by different names. And, they teach you all these sort of principles and these rules of logic and, working with sets and things like that. And then once you have those, you're in a much better position to tackle something like real analysis, which is applying these methods of proof to a real number line and to theorems based on the real number line. And or an abstract algebra, and you're like algebraic, applying methods of proof to algebraic objects. So I remember that what I would do is I would say, okay, guys, so here's the what we're proving, and here's what we know, and it would usually be, and oftentimes it was written either partially in English or like pseudo English. It wasn't like, and then I would say, let's pick a series of steps that would convert this sort of English description of this mathematical statement into an algebraic statement. This purely like, well, y equals this or whatever, n equals da da da. And then I do the reverse is written in, and then I put that in algebra. So then you have algebra to algebra, right? So it's like, it's like they're both written in Japanese. I don't really go with Japanese, so I'm going to convert both to English.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I work with them, yeah. Right?
Right, yeah. So you're just trying to make them more familiar and more similar to each other. Yeah, because more concrete. Yeah.
You can reason about algebraic equations. You can reason about equations. I'm redundant, but say algebraic equations. You reason about equations with the rules of algebra. But when you just have English statements, it's really hard to, like, how do you reason about it? Now, a mathematician could say, well, hand wavy, well, this is a closed set, so we know da-da-da-da. And it's just a bunch of, everybody kind of knows what the other mathematician is talking about the other mathematician, because they're just compacting, pages of algebra into a few statements, and they're all willing to accept it because they all agree that that's true. But when you're dealing with younger students, or you're really trying to get them to understand rigorous, careful reasoning, then you're supposed to go to the algebra steps, and then you just apply algebra. So okay, English to algebra da 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 da, a bunch of algebraic steps, then convert that to English, and you're done, right? So okay, so let's. And it was funny. I mean, but when you're doing a lot of reps on that was absolutely key for the student.
Yeah,
right? Absolutely key. Tons of reps on that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, it was after we did a bunch of reps and that sort of thing, and a couple other things, there's other kind of tricks, like if the statement, if you're asked to prove a statement that feels obvious, then you should use proof by contradiction. That's another sort of thing. Or if you're bringing the ends of the rope together, and you're like, well, isn't it kind of obvious? Then just make that step proof by contradiction. But
it's like in movies, like foreshadowing, like they show the gun on the table. It's like, I don't know. Do you think they're going to person get killed by the gun? My guess. Yes. Why are they showing this gun sitting on the table? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So they're giving away the game a little.
These were like, I mean, these were just like these kind of golden prerequisites. You had mentioned like the golden topics for like the SAT stuff that like you realize it's not taught in the school curriculum, but you really need to know it if you're going to do well.
And if you do, you have a massive advantage.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so there's the same kind of stuff when it comes to proofwriting in particular. And I mean, she didn't have those prerequisites in place, and that was causing some struggle. Of course, no fault of her own. She was just this was never taught explicitly, and you don't really figure this out much unless you're really like you just look into this stuff, solve problems for fun. Like you learn you pick it up elsewhere because you watched some math video or you're really into like the
You
hearing
went to math summer
mathematicians talk
camp
to
or
you
something.
know.
Math one,
Yeah,
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 math one or
exactly.
something.
But once we filled those in, it's like, well, okay, she doesn't need my help anymore. Like she's good. I mean, it took quite a bit of work to fill those in. It wasn't just like a 1 day or 2 day sort of thing. Like this was sort of an ongoing thing for a few months. But
She's a
once
very,
it was
very
filled
bright
in,
student who was at a
oh
very
yeah,
good elite school. He worked very
yeah,
hard. So this is not a half-assed student who low aptitude, not indifferent level of motivation. This is no, everything was set to go in this situation. But it sounds like she hadn't taken or they didn't offer a methods of proof course after calculus and before real analysis. They just kind of did the,
yeah. I can't remember if there was, but I mean,
if they did, she was still
regard.
lacking those skills.
Yeah,
Whatever
exactly.
covered, we
So
covered them.
I actually took yeah, two methods of proof courses in my background. One was at a community college, one was at Notre Dame. Um, but funny enough, I took the one at Notre Dame after I had taken all my advanced math courses, just 'cause I needed another credit, like for. But anyway, so but it was kind of interesting just to see what was covered, and like I mean, this sort of stuff wasn't really explicitly gone over.
What were
It
they
was one of
doing
those
then? I mean, that's the whole
things.
point of that course.
Yeah, I mean, the thing
Weird.
was, it's like they would give you a lot of problems to do. It was much more of a rapid fire problem setting.
Okay.
Not okay. I should say it was not anything near the like, oh, this is a 2 minute problem. This is a 3 minute problem. It was more like maybe instead of like 5 to 10 homework problems for the week, maybe you had like 20 or something like
So a
that.
little better.
Um,
Yeah.
a little better, or a little more scoped down, but it just yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like there were some examples of how to do these problems, but there wasn't just I guess the examples were not exactly narrated with a like what's the overall procedure of what's the overall idea of what we're trying to do here.
Why are we doing this? When is it going to be useful? How is it applied? And we get
Yeah,
some practice, and
yeah,
not just an explanation. You need practice applying it in a context where it all links together, and you're like, oh, I get what's going on here.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So that's just it doesn't seem to be. It's like yeah, these proof writing course. Even when there's an explicit like introduction to proof course that is meant to bridge this gap. I mean, I'm sure it helps more students cross the chasm, but it's still there's still large steps that you gotta long jump over, and
right,
if you can't do that, then
you're in trouble.
you're kind of screwed unless you have somebody else to learn it
It's
from.
almost like in terms of accountability, you'd either one, you'd have to have like someone senior in the math department really defining what's done in the course in terms of like, hey, we're using this book, which they probably do. You're using this book, but really emphasizing these are the specific things that they need to be able to do by the end of the quarter. Because when they start real analysis or abstract algebra, whichever one they do first, they're going to have to do proof by induction and proof by contradiction, and they're going to have to do proofs with sets, and they're going to have to do proofs, whatever. And so with real numbers, and they have to do all these things, and so that the person teaching the course say, okay, can they do these things at the end of the course? Right. And another way to do it is okay, well, anybody who's teaching real analysis, abstract algebra, they have to take methods of proof the quarter before. So you got to eat your own dog
Yeah,
food. So if these kids can only
yeah,
real
I like
analysis
that.
and they can't prove, their statements about open and closed sets because you didn't, properly scaffold them the previous quarter with, the techniques and stuff, then well, that's how you're going to suffer. And then you're going to have a watered down course or frustrated course, or you're going to have this massive curve where everybody gets like a 30% on the midterm and final because nobody knows anything. And you're going to pretend that, a 37% is an A, you know.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I think there's been some times previously when you've talked about what happens when you've got two people building different parts of the same system that are meant to integrate to each other,
Right.
but they're not talking to each other and they're not like, they're just not synchronized and coordinated.
I've done
And
this
what,
myself.
yeah, you've experienced the pain that happens.
Okay, so let me tell you a story. So my very first startup, and I was like 20, I started a year after I graduated high school, and I did it with my good friend Phil, who we were math majors at University of Chicago until he bailed for sculpture and film because he's weak of soul. No, seriously, he's like a math guy who's also like an actor and artist, so he kind of spanned that. So he did math for a while, and then he decided he wanted to do more film stuff. Anyway, so we did the startup. So he had been a coder like me. He had been writing code in high school, and I remember him writing like he worked for the psychology department writing like psychology tests on the Mac. So he was a paid programmer while was an undergraduate. So anyway, we started this company together, and we're building. So this is a Windows app that had this big, elaborate UI, lots of like grids of flashing numbers and things. It was like it was very cool. And this is before you could just like buy an off the shelf grid of something. And you had to build everything. It was like core graphics objects, and rendering text and placing them on the screen, all this stuff. And I'm building the whole engine, this elaborate financial simulation engine that simulated, these equities and futures and derivatives behaviors and all stuff's really complex, yield curves and things, and these whole options, families of options, and it was really complex. And we worked on it for months. We'd sit down and we're working next to each other, talking every day, and he's building the Grizzle stuff. And then I was like, he had all this kind of fake numbers for his testing, and we had not been building we had not established ahead of time sort of like a user interface. Like this is the sort of the API that you're going to use, Phil, to get this data. And so then we're getting it. And this is back before the day we even had like a network. We had like a 3-point-inch floppy disk that we would fling across the room to back and forth to each other like a Frisbee. Usually it would land and get stuck, hit the wall, or knock over somebody's books or something. So that's what we would. And so, and I remember, so we did it and we sat down together, and it was like, we both I don't know what we were thinking, because we were like, we didn't know. I was like, well, you do that. And then it was this whole thing that took us, I think it took a few days of kind of like figuring out how to get all his UI code to talk to my engine code, because we were so green and we were 22. Like, I mean, I worked for summers for an engineering firm writing some stuff, and he, this is back in the early, so we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And then we learned the hard way, like, okay, you need to be, the front and the back end need to be talking to each other from the day one. You need to be like writing a system and getting everything to compile, and then in shaping and melding the front end, the back ends to work together from day one, and defining a user interface. Okay, well, so these are going to be my API calls. This is how you put information in. It's like information out. This is what it looks like. And then you can build like sort of a fake, like a mocking thing that maybe he could just use, that has some hard-coded numbers so that he knows what to expect. And then whatever. But I learned that lesson early off. I mean, like, we've been talking about this stuff constantly and we were working on it, I think, for months. And then it was all just mismatch. And it was just a hard, it was a hard thing to overcome. And I think that's just happens with human nature. If you don't get systems to integrate from day one, and so that kind of has built-in accountability. If he's like, well, Jason, like, you said there was going to be these functions to get this information, you don't have it. I'm like, oh yeah, my bad. Like, let me write. Sorry. Wait, where's the third parameter? I don't know. I'm passing in I'm like, yeah, good point. So I'm like, okay, let me fix this or whatever. Like, and I'm like, well, why aren't you showing the time to expiration for these things? He's like, oh, I'm like, you got to show the, and so this is,
Hmm.
it's kind of like we're talking about with like teachers, just like, is a little transgression, you got to suffer. Okay. That's wrong. Fix it. Right. Early, find the problems early
Yes.
and fix them. So I'm doing this. You're expecting that. Let's see if we're on the same page. Teacher and
Yeah.
student, two courses melded together, back and front end.
Yeah, because otherwise, regardless of whether it's a student who's drifting off course or whether it's
Two
two
green
courses, methods of
developers who are
proof and
writing
real
different parts of a
analysis, yeah, or
system.
developers, yeah, right. These it's like these impedance mismatch, these defects just
That's right.
compound over and over and over until you look up and you expect to be able to reach out and grab the other thing, and it turns out you're like 100 miles apart.
That's right.
And
That's right. And I think in that situation, it sounds like there was like a lot of decoupling between who's designing and teaching the methods of proof course and what the real skills that have to be mastered by the students who complete the course and what's expected coming into the courses that really follow on. And if they're not teaching the same course or then held to some, and see, it's kind of a pain, it's like, it was sort of interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine at lunch yesterday, and he was talking about how he hired this guy, this marketing guy. So my buddy has a big, like a fulfillment company, and they have like pick and pack warehouses all over the country. And he and his wife founded this, 20 years ago. And, he's been running for many years, and they have a big technology arm to this thing that handles all the infrastructure, that handles all the tech stuff that they built up over years. Because when they started this stuff didn't exist. You couldn't buy like a license, some big off the shelf thing. Anyway, so he was telling me the story at lunch yesterday. He hired the guy, a marketing guy, and he's like, the guy had like really good, conversation. Oh yeah, I totally get. We're all on the same page, and it was really, he had a lot of confidence that this guy knew what he was talking about. Well, what the new website needed to be, the branding, all this, whatever marketing, strategy was going to be, the whatever. And he says his wife is very much like, well, because he was sort of really, he was sort of like, I don't know, like I'm not getting the right, that I'm getting some signal that maybe he's off track. That maybe, and his wife is like, Tom, just let him do his thing. You got to hire really good people, give them the context, the goals, information, and let them do their thing. And so then he was feeling guilty. He's like, I don't want to be a micromanager, right? Because micromanaging is bad. Lo and behold, 6 months show up, and it's incredibly underwhelming. It's terrible. It's terrible. He's just like, oh my God, how much money did I spend on 6 months? And then he's asking, he's like, okay, so wait, why this? And the guy's like, well, let me see. I'm trying to explain this to you. Like, like, hey, you're this out of touch boomer or something. You know what I mean? And Tom's like, I don't, the conversation, it sounded so good. It sounded like he understood everything. And he was like so excited. And I said, well, Tom, there's a really good article came out like a year. There was a talk given at startup school by Brian Chesky, who's one of the founders of Airbnb, called Founder Mode, which Paul Graham then wrote a really, widely circulated essay by the same name, Founder Mode. And Brian Chesky's given a number of talks on or interviews on what is Founder Mode, right? And some people say, Founder Mode has been forever. Like people who are older, like that's, of course, but the gist of it was that a lot of well-meaning people would tell young founders who have growing, scaling companies, look, the way you scale a company beyond just 10 or 5, 10, 15, 20 people is you got to hire great people, empower them, give them the direction, give them the resources, and get out of the way. And he's like, and then Brian is like, that almost killed Airbnb, almost utterly destroyed it. And when he gave that talk, and then we talk about how I fixed it, which I'll go into a second. But all these other founders learned the same lesson. They got all the same advice from all these people. Hire great people, give them direction, get out of the way, don't micromanage, and then you're good. And it was a failure. And they all had to learn the same lesson that Brian learned, is that you have to get into the details. You got to roll your sleeves up and you got to meet. You don't just have your direct reports. You got to meet down with the people in the engineering department, the marketing department, the sales, the fulfill, whatever. And you got to get in there and you need to be seeing what they're doing. You need to be talking to them. You need to be, you don't just wait to the end product and go yes or no, because you just waste a huge amount of money. And Paul Graham's sort of, his takeaway was that the advice everybody was giving really applied to professional managers. When you have a scaled company, the founder's gone and we hired some, MBA type CEO takes over and he hires people who are supposedly experts in their area and they do it. But he's like, that also a lot of people in the executive are just really good at bullshit. Everybody's, but these companies are often so big and successful just because they have so much momentum and so much market, so much scale that they're going to almost succeed no matter what. But smaller scaling companies can just totally run off the road. And it was sort of the same thing. Tom fell victim to the don't be a micromanager, right? So wait to the end, and is like, no. And so I sent him, I said, I'm going to send you this essay. I'm going to send you for interviews. You got to watch this. Cause he was like, because he felt really bad. He's like, he's like having this cognitive dissonance. Like my instinct is telling me to get involved, but I know micromanaging is bad and it's a disaster. And I was like, Tom, no, this is founder mode. That was wrong. You got to be involved. You need I'd be talking to this guy at least once a week, if not more. Show me what you're researching. What are you thinking? Give me some stuff. And so one thing Brian Chesky says in this, I was looking for some really short interviews to share with him because I wanted Tom to get comfortable and understand this and not have this sort of shame that he's a micromanaging because he's trying to get more involved in the process. And Brian Chesky says that he was meeting with one of people who, in this sense, and then the person goes, well, he's like, is this my decision or your decision? He's like, that's exactly the problem. It's our decision. Right. And we're working together. I'm helping. It's like Steve Jobs did this. Like he would continually, when people, I remember this great book I read about the development of the, it was about the iPhone, but it was specifically about the guy who wrote the touch keypad. Because back in the day, the only way you would type stuff in was like, really rudimentary, like on a number pad, but he would like the BlackBerry, right?
Yeah.
People remember like, what's a BlackBerry?
I remember
like,
that actually.
Look it up.
My dad had a BlackBerry for a while. I was really young, but
yeah, that was huge in the 2000s and in the business world. All business people had like BlackBerries. Had a little screen and you had all your little keypad below it that was actually physical keys. Well, this idea that you could type on a screen, because they didn't have like touch sensitive screens really. I mean, they had maybe something that was like you could go to a bank and like a teller, like a big thing, but not like a little screen. And if you read Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson, he talks all about that, the Gorilla Glass, and I mean it was 3M who made the screens and development that, because that became a technology that you could actually use, which made something like iPhone possible. Anyway, so this book about the development of this keypad is like, everybody would be working on their stuff, and then every few days or a week at the least, they would meet as a team, and everybody show off what they're doing to the lead of their group. And then once it was good enough, they'd bring it in to show Steve, and you'd get ushered in, and Steve would have a couple of lieutenants there, and then his boss would come in with him, and he'd go through the whole thing. And this is like when it's done, it's like it's far enough that we have something to show. And Steve would say, well, I see there's 2 ways to do this. And the guy's like, yeah. And he's like, why isn't there one? He's like, well, there's 2. He's like, which one is better? And he's like, well, then let's do that. What he did, the whole Steve-isms of simplifying. But anyway, the point was, it was like a continuous iteration. And he's like, on the example that Brian Chesky would give about Steve Jobs, he's like, I don't think Johnny Ive would tell you, Johnny Ive, who was the renowned industrial designer for Apple. So if you think of all the cool, iPads, iPhones, MacBooks, Airs, anything you can think of, he designed. And he's like, I don't think Johnny Ive would ever have accused Steve Jobs of micromanaging. But in Walter Isaacson book, which it's been a long, I read that in like 2010 or 11 when it first came out, right after Steve Jobs passed away, and one thing what Steve Isaacson said is that Walter Isaacson said about Steve Jobs is he would stop by Johnny Ive's workshop like pretty much every single day. What's going on? Just because he loved the design process. He loved talking about with Johnny, like what he's thinking, what are the problems he's trying to solve, what are some model, and he'd, sometimes they'd have stuff to show off, and sometimes they wouldn't. They would just talk and they would just walk. And so Steve was integral to the design process, which is why, in part, the stuff was so great. I mean, yeah, you had a brilliant designer in Johnny Ive, but you had a CEO who, he had an incredible aesthetic taste. I mean, there was this saying, I can't remember who, I think it was John Gruber, who said something like the design of a product will never exceed the taste of the CEO. Actually, I think I said that to you like a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. We were talking about something else.
That's right.
And so there's that. I mean, there's a lot of things that made this successful, but one thing that was successful is Steve was deeply involved in a very positive collaborative relationship with Johnny Ive. And I'm sure
it sounds like it sounds like another instance of if you just stay on the rails with your buddy, like from the beginning, keep that like communication loop tight, just stay together in this, then it's good. Like it's like if the founder comes in and has been staying on top of like what's happening and actually is invested in the details, and they are giving feedback on that, like this is all good. Like it becomes the failure mode that happens is when the founder has just kind of like has gone out of touch for a long time, and something has a lot of momentum has been built into building something that is not aligned with what the founder wants to see, or the founder has not been keeping on top of the details, doesn't really understand the process, and there's a communication barrier between like the maker is like building their thing, and then the founder comes in and then says some stuff, and the maker's like, they don't really understand like how difficult this is, or like what they ask for is impossible. Like just, but if you let it get bad, if you let it get so out of touch because you're not syncing up frequently, then yeah, it can spiral out of control. But if you just start from the beginning, just stay tight together, then that's the way.
Yeah, it's like whenever you have two processes that need to be in sync, and it could be just two human beings working on something, it could be two departments, it could be back-end, front-end developers, it could be whatever it is. Whenever those things are supposed to be in sync, well, the more frequently they sync up with accountability, like, well, that actually doesn't connect. Hey, Johnny, you designed this thing. The engineering department says they're going to need an extra half an inch to get that thing. Oh, great. Find that early. And the third day that Johnny's playing with the model, I was like, well, the head of engineering said, well, you need at least 9.5 inches, not 9. And I was like, okay, well, the casting process and the molding process, we get it early, right? Did you waste time doing the wrong thing? This is not going to work. And that happens at departments. And so, and you almost can't, the error is rarely over communication. The error is usually under communication. It's like you almost can't over communicate. I remember one thing I used to say to you when you first were teaching Math Academy. I say, communicate with the parents early and often. Get a positive line of communication. Tell them your plans for the year. Tell them you're excited. Tell them this is going to be a great year. And then First couple things that students do well, immediately tell the parents, hey, they're doing a great job after a great start. I'm really excited. I think, she's going to do a great year. I think she has a lot of thing. And as soon as things start to go off and rails, say, I'm a little concerned. She hasn't done homework the last couple of days, and there's no focus in classes. We really need to get things early and often. And the parents are synced up. You guys are synced up. But if you wait and you end up a C- at the end of the quarter, and she's like, oh my God, what happened? Oh my God,
Yeah, that's
it's a
right.
disaster.
Yeah, right. Because like building some kind of like positive relationship with the parent so that you can break bad news later on if it happens and have them on your side. They trust you and they're going to try and help rectify the situation. And also, even if it's bad news, like pretty much all the way out, like at least they hear about it early. And
You have a
it's
paper
not
trail. Like I've been telling you,
yeah,
we've been over this every day
exactly.
of days, not doing their homework,
Yeah,
not trying, not focusing. I mean, and there's a whole, and so when if it goes bad, then you have to talk to the principal or whatever, and you're like, look, she's just not. I don't think this is the right class for her because she's not doing the work and she's not trying and she's not whatever, and that's where they go, yeah, let's find the right, better placement where the student can be successful or whatever. So yeah, but anyway, that's this kind of thing is over communication. I think like one of the things that why I think we've been successful, what we've been trying to do is that you and I talk a lot, right?
yeah.
We
Every day, sometimes twice a day. Yeah.
least, I think on average we talk twice a day. Probably usually there's a Zoom call when I'll be working on something. You'll be like, hey, can we jump on a call? Let's talk about this. How about that? And a lot of times I'll call you when I'm on my drive to lunch.
Yeah.
And then I'll call you when I'm walking the dog. If I didn't call you while I was walking my dog, which is like 5 o'clock, I'll call you when I head to the gym, So I would say more than at least 2 to 2.5. If I average, I would say 2 to 2.5 times a day would be the average. But that, I think, and there are probably some times just like, well, maybe you guys are wasting time. Jason, you probably shouldn't have called him, and you probably let Justin just kind of cook on what he was doing and ask him for the seventh time, how should we think about this thing? But
On average, those pay off though, big time. It's like the repeated whenever there's a problem or a question that we don't really understand or have a satisfying answer to. It's like a spaced repetition sort of thing.
mm-hmm.
It's like, let's just think about it a bit. You ask a question today, we kind of brainstorm a little bit, just talk about it a little bit. That's consolidated overnight. Day later, ask the same question. We are not there to a solution yet, but we've gotten further than the previous discussion. And it's like, eventually, it's like no matter what the hard problem is, eventually it kind of cracks and
we see our
we
way to
figure
it.
out some way to it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't talk to Alex as much. Alex, once or twice a week. And Alex is our director of curriculum, and he's in the UK. Although we talk every day on Slack. There's less necessary communication, because it's more like he's running a team, they're developing these courses, I reserve feedback, especially when it's a new kind of a course and there's a lot more unknowns and things about how technology is coming into play or what the expectations are for certain things. But it's less hard to get out of sync because there's less to talk about the differential equations course he's working on. It's like, how's it coming? Oh, we're doing this and this. We're covering this. Cool. What about that? Oh, yeah. It's like this.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
keep it up. Stuff's like here. Oh, here's some screenshots. Here's some tip. Oh, this is so and so is working on this. This is looking really good. I'm wrestling with some of these topics, trying to get this module. I think we need to consolidate some stuff. I think we might need to do this, that. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Sometimes earlier years ago when courses or our sort of methodology or our sort of standards were set a certain way, it was less clear. And I'd be like, okay, listen, like we're talking multivariable calculus, we can't have 7-minute problems.
Yeah.
And conversations about how do we scope these things down and make them really efficient so they're learning things they need to learn, but they do learn start to finish on all these things. But there's a lot of discussions about that kind of stuff. But once you figure that stuff out, there's less. So we talk a little less frequently, although we do typically do the three of us do a call every week,
Yeah,
an hour,
weekly call.
a couple hour call sometimes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll do two, a lot of Slack stuff. But the thing about Alex is he's got a kid and they're in the UK. And so when we're coming online and getting our days going, he's kind of trying to finish things up
Hmm.
and, dinner and homework. And, it's like, I feel a little worse bugging him
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
I
That
don't,
makes sense.
I don't feel as bad. I'm like, I always tell you, like, dude, like if I call you and you and Sunjan are having dinner or you're doing something, you're watching it, just like, don't answer. I'm fine. I'm like, I will take that as you're busy. I'm not worried about, but I'm like, if you're working anyway, and I'm like walking the dog and I'm thinking about something, then like, let's if that's, that I think would be helpful if we could brainstorm or think about, then let's talk. So anyway, that's kind of how, for anyone's curious, like so what's interesting about this whole syncing up is like, if like we are a fully distributed company. You're in Boston, Sandy and I are in Pasadena, Alex is in the UK. I can't remember what city he's in. And it's somewhere hour from London or something. And uh, and then the rest of the content team is spread throughout the world. Am I forgetting anybody? Well, we've had other people, but we've had other contractors and
Yeah.
stuff. But we're
Yeah.
totally,
Everyone's spread out. There's no hub or anything. It's just everyone's is distributed. Yeah.
but we've learned to be very, I think, efficient and effective with this model. I think it's funny, they talk about like they talk about companies that struggle with this, and I think some of them who are like, if you can't, either fully distributed or you're not. Like it's tough if you have a hub of people who are working together and then other people are kind of off on their own,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of communication that happens between these people that's not written down, and it's not shared, and therefore it's not easily shareable. But if there's anything that you and I are talking about that I'm thinking, oh, Alex needs to know about this, I'll just do it in our shared channel. Or if
Yeah.
Sandy needs to know about it, and I'll put it in, the four of us put it in the director's channel, or whatever. And so that we kind of, and then of course we have lots of channels for different specialized topics, but it just seems to work really well. I mean, how do you feel about I don't know, how things have evolved, the structure, the evolution of our distributed, work?
Yeah. Honestly, well, you and I worked together closely in Pasadena for several years, and the way we're doing it now, distributed, it feels like there's really no loss of information transmission.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it feels just as
Which is
effective to
weird.
me. Yeah, I
I mean,
know.
it's weird how well it works, because we had lots of like impromptu conversations in the evenings or even daytime where we just get
Yeah.
to.
Well, okay. I think one thing in particular that works out well for us is allowing conversations to flow out of scope and have it like Okay, so when I think of like a dinosaur corporate company who tries to go like remote and it doesn't work very well. Actually, I have an uncle who he works for a big company, and his team was remote for a while, and it was not working so good, and he's trying to get people back into the office. But one of the problems he cited is that there's just like a lack of like spontaneous idea generation,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like like the where you just like talk to your buddy at the other desk about something that just crossed your mind, and then you come up with an idea, you know.
Right.
Um, but what we do a lot is we allow conversations to flow out of scope. We don't put a scope on the
As anybody
conversation.
listening to the show can attest.
Yeah,
Exhibit A. Out of scope. That should actually be the name of the show. Should be Math Equation. We call it Out of Scope.
yeah, yeah, maybe,
Out of scope.
maybe it should be. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like it's one of those things that like initially you kind of maybe if you haven't allowed conversations to flow out of scope before, then you kind of feel like, what are we talking about? Like, no, you gotta like, let's bring things back in. What's the to-do list? Check everything off. Like, but it's like when you focus your thoughts too much, You talked about this on a previous podcast where it's like you lose once you focus down too much. You lose all the kind of background brainstorming that you were doing. It's like the balloons kind of fly away.
Right. Oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
I can't hold on to multiple. Once I start focusing on one idea, I lose the other two that are kind of just in the
And I
periphery of my brain, and I lose them. Like, God, what was I thinking about? I can't. It's gone.
I think that kind of happens at a meta level, like in addition to within your own brain, but just like also just within an organization. There are these kind of like spontaneous thoughts or actions or problems or noticing things. Oh, that's weird. I wonder why this, like just things like that are not like they're not drilled down fully, but they're just kind of happening in the background.
Yeah.
And if a conversation if it comes up in a conversation and you drill down deep into it, you come away with something valuable. But if every conversation is scoped down really hard, and like every meeting has a name on it, this is the meeting to discuss that thing XYZ. We're not discussing A, B, and C, A, B, and C. We're not like we're trying very hard to stay on task. Then you run into a problem where you're just exploiting what you already know how to do, and you're not really exploring at all the space.
I think a couple of key characteristics that make it work is, one, you got to like the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I really enjoy talking with you and Alex.
Likewise.
To a fault. So I'm like, kind of like, what's up? And you're like, I'm just like, I pretend that I have something to talk about. A lot of times I have nothing to talk about. Like, what's up?
Yeah, there was one time that you called me and I was right next to Sanjana, and I picked up the phone, and then you said like, "What's up, dog?" And then she was just like fell over laughing.
She's like, "How old are these guys?"
I know, but yeah, that's the kind of vibe. It's a very much like a friendly sort of, not corporate, not stodgy, not
yes, because if you're not enjoying speaking with the other person, then you're going to scope it down because you want to get it done, get it out of here. What do we got to talk about? Okay, so we're going to talk about the SAT math course again, or we're going to talk about gravity, or we're going to talk about the whatever. My boss wants to go over this stuff for me, or we have a team, 3 people, and everybody's like, okay, another meeting, right? And we're just going to grind through this stuff. Anybody, any ideas? What are their shortcomings? What are their failure modes? And I don't know. Well, get back to me if you. And it's not fun. Nobody really wants to be there. Some people may not hate it, but most people, it's not like they're on their top 10 list of things that they'd like to be doing. Where I'm like excited to talk to you. I'm like, what's up? How's it coming? How's the thing going? A lot of times you're running some experiment, you're trying something. Like, how's that? And being really excited about what you're working on. Right? Because if you're excited about the thing you're doing and you enjoy speaking with the person you're working on it with, then that sets the stage to have like fun, more meandering, out of scope conversations, right? Because you're not doing everything you can to end the conversation as quickly as possible. You're just like, okay, it's like, I get a call from the bank and there's something, and she's like, okay, I'm just like, okay, yeah, okay, yep, that's the thing, yep. What do you need more? No, okay, bye. It's like, I'm just a nice person, but I don't really want to talk about, banking services. This is like, what do you need from my end to get this thing done that I'm done? And then like, I got stuff to do. So, but if you do that, and that's why I think, they talk about culture, what's the culture of your company? I still don't understand what half that means, and I don't know if most people do, but it's like, at the end of the day, you gotta work with people who you really like and can work with and can, I don't know, vibe with, to use how the kids say today, and if you do that and everybody's really excited about what they're working on, then you're set up to succeed. But I think the other thing for us, again, and this is probably just because I'm so loquacious, right? And it's like I want to talk all the time. I think better when I'm talking things out loud. I think that's one thing I've mentioned to you a few times. It's like when
Hmm.
somebody's like, well, you need to write to know what you think. It's like, I kind of need to talk to know what I think. They can,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like my mental whiteboard is just talking. And so like when you and I talk, I can be like, okay, so let's think about this again. Okay, so this happens, right? And then then this, like I'm writing it down to whiteboard. Okay, right, and then this, and you'll go, well, actually, da da da. Okay, right. Okay, right. Okay, so then scratch it up. So we're kind of like we kind of have this shared whiteboard
Hmm.
that's part of our conversation. It allows me to kind of think through things more, and I think that helps. So for me personally, the conversation is an aid to clarifying my thinking. But but I think also it's just sort of we've kind of set the the habit of just the norm of having lots of conversations. So it's like, okay, Jason's going to call me, and as long as I can get off, for dinner or whatever, then we talk
Hmm.
about whatever, and then we do. And a lot of times we solve really good problems and come to lots more concrete solutions, better understanding things. Sometimes it's there are some times where it's not as productive, but it's never really painful. And if I feel like we're not really getting anywhere, I'm like, okay, well, I think that's it. Then I'll just kind of like let it go. I'm like, all right, well, I'll let you get back to it.
One thing about the conversations is that it really, I mean, one of the things that we have found over and over that's incredibly important to getting good results out of anything, whether it's like somebody who's working on something or even an LLM that's trying to do something for you, is context. And if you if you're scoping down your conversations all the time, you're only giving somebody the context that you think they need to solve the thing that you're asking them to do, which is often not nearly enough context. Like we've learned this over and over, right? Like you ask an LLM to do something, or even you ask another person to do something, and you think that you've given them like plenty of background information, but once you really dig down deeply into it, like maybe they come back with their first attempt, and then it just dawns on you that like, oh my god, they have there's a lot of foundational things that I forgot to say that they're not spun up on, and it's kind of like the glass shatters. You have that happen enough, and then you just kind of like come to accept that if you are, unless you have a very tight loop with somebody and you are constantly feeding them just overall context, even if it doesn't seem like 100% on the nose relevant to the thing they're doing at the moment, like they need that. That's the only way that they're going to have enough background context to pull from when needed.
That's a really good point. I think people really underestimate the amount of context that they have relative to what little bit that they're sharing. Because you be
Mm-hmm.
saying things to somebody, but you're selecting the context that you think is relevant. And a lot of times your assumptions are wrong. They need more. And they may understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. And they have some understanding of it, but it still doesn't have the level of concreteness or connection to other things or whatever to really work for them. And so then they're kind of cargo culting in a way, right? They're kind of,
Yeah.
you said these things, I'm doing these things, I don't really know the why and where this came from in the history, so I don't have this intuitive sense of all these things. I'm just going to go off what these words mean in English or something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
and that's often not enough information, right?
well, I think when you were doing some experiments with some LLM stuff, you kept going, you have to put more and more and more and more context and really fine tune. And I mean like this, like, oh, I wrote like a 1 second, 1 or 2 sentence prompt, and then it turned out I went to 5 and 10. It's like, no, you went to tens, 20 pages
Yeah, I broke it down into
detailed.
like Originally, I thought this was just a like basically one paragraph worth of information that I have to give, and then it turns out after I spent a couple of days on it, just like drilling down on what are its failure modes, try to scaffold it better through the process. It turns into this 5-step thing, and each step is itself like some paragraph of information, and I have to give like I have to enumerate all like the structure of each step, and like for instance, this qualifies as blah blah blah. This other thing does not, and I have to give some examples of that because it's not enough to right. Just it's not. Often you think of words in a slightly different way than they might be used just generally, like the dictionary definition, and yeah,
Well, it's my friend of mine from college, who Peter Stone, who is a machine learning professor, or was at UTS. I think he's now the chief scientist at Sony, and really really smart guy. And I remember we were working on we had this little startup we were kind of doing with another guy, and back in the day, intelligent trading machines, I think it was called ATM, right? And he said one thing he said to me. He goes, he said, when you're building a machine learning system, and this is back in like 1999, and he goes, the machine learning algorithm has to have all the information that a human has about that problem. And if you withhold anything, don't expect it to operate at the level that a human can operate. And so we are dealing with a machine learning, very quantitative, concrete thing. It's a little easier to figure out what the human knows or doesn't know. When you're talking about like an LLM type of situation where it's much a more nebulous, and it's really hard to figure out what the human knows that may be relevant. And you try and make some hard cuts. You're like, well, and it turns out maybe I'll include this or maybe I won't. And then it turns out later that a lot of information was important that the LM didn't know. And the same goes to talking with humans. We've been recently trying to hire someone for a position, and we, interviewed tons of people, and it was very clear that a lot of them lacked sufficient context in a lot of areas.
It's like you can talk to them at a high level about these things. You can get faked out because I don't know if they're cargo culting or they're talking from their own experience, which kind of maps to similar high level principles, but doesn't actually come back down into our specific context. Yeah, but you run into a similar problem of you're conversing in abstraction land, and then it turns out there's a lot of information in the fine details of things that you only get really by doing the reps.
And
if you haven't done
sharing
the
the
reps,
concrete
yeah,
product or shared work product or this thing that you're doing. It's like I can say blue, and you may be thinking of the blue of the shirt, which is kind of a dark blue purple, but I may thinking like a lighter blue, a light with no purple in it or something. And you'd be like,
yeah,
or no red in it, I should say. And a much lighter blue or greenish blue. And you'd be like, they're both true. And of course this is blue. What are you talking about? This is blue. But it's a totally different blue and has a totally different effect. And that's just something as simple as a color, and the same as with everything. The English language is so general and unspecific, which makes it, when we talk to each other, when humans talk to each other, which I think a lot of times you hear philosophers really, I think it was Wittgenstein said that it was just, of course, one of these incredible, the most impressive philosophers of the, 1900s or something. And he said, and I think he basically bailed from philosophy because of the semantic mismatch. It's like, no, we can never agree on what the hell we're even talking about. I'm not a philosopher, so someone who's a PhD in philosophy be like, well, Jason, that's a little oversimplification. Da da da. Okay, fine. But nevertheless, there was a frustration with the inability for us to agree on what these terms actually mean in a way that we can argue about them in a productive manner and come to a shared agreement, understanding. And it's just this endless talking, which is why
Trying to make logically tight, precise arguments with fuzzy terms. Yeah.
like when you see on any comment thread anywhere on the internet, everybody's arguing about all this stuff. And I think a large percentage of the things they're arguing about, if they were sitting in the same room together, they may not be arguing because they could go back and forth clarifying really what they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And they're like, oh, this is your blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I mean in this, like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? And again, it's that they're not synced up. So if you can't have this real time thing where I'm kind of reading, you're saying something, but I can kind of see the tone of your voice, your face, like how concrete this thing is you're saying, or whether it's just kind of off the cuff, or you're like, this is a definitive statement. And I'm like, oh, so, it's just not enough information. You gotta share that information, share that context so much.
Yeah, and another thing is it's not just one conversation of a context dump. Like this is many conversations because often the context it's so big it does not fit in your working memory. You have to spread it out. You have to consolidate context and like to make room for more. And I mean that's even in LLM usage, that's like one of the big frustrations, right? Is that like context, everyone knows context is important and LLMs now have larger context windows than they used to, but it's still not, it's compared to the amount of context that is often required to really perform a task to the level that you need, like the context window is still tiny, like 100,000 tokens, a million tokens, like that's still like, I don't know, maybe you can dump a part of a book in there, but like you really need like a library's worth of information to complete the task. I mean, humans do this better, like they can actually consolidate all this into long-term
Yeah, because we'll be
memory,
able to
right?
trial and error. I do a little piece from this book, a little piece from that book, and back and forth, and I'm filling out what are you saying, and your understanding, and I'm like, oh, I think he's thinking about this way, or you're correcting my understanding of something, and it's just this constant feedback and error correction about what we're dealing with, so we can pull context from lots, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to try ahead of time, think of everything you need to know, and put it in here in a way that's not going to flood the channel or overwhelm the LM with information, but try and get, but I don't know.